Hey, light to medium spoiler warning. Now, let's talk about Legacy and the new Blue Beetle film. At one point during my time seeing Blue Beetle, two thoughts struck me in quick succession. First was, okay, this isn't very subtle. When the film brings Xolo Maridueña's Jaime Reyes into contact with social or economic issues, that contact isn't subtextual. Jaime's family are minorities suffering at the hands of gentrification, and they know it. And they let you know that they know it. Degree or no degree, the dangling ladder of social mobility doesn't reach Palmyra Keys. That contact is head-on, and similarly, there's nothing indirect about the film's visuals, its action sequences, or even its romance subplot, which starts loudly and ends in a make-out session couched in innuendo. The class divide is concrete and visible, and Nana's an ex-revolutionary. The film isn't interested in beating around the bush. It's loud and it's direct. And after seeing this, I had my next thought. Why not? Subtlety in itself isn't a virtue, and being direct isn't necessarily a flaw. The characters of Blue Beetle say what they're thinking. They wear their hearts on their sleeves. They have that in common with the film itself. Blue Beetle paints in primary colors. It's playing for the back row. The big characters, the melodrama, and the unmissable and unmissably effective familial throughline are heightened, bombastic, stylized, in a way that's almost nostalgic. The last generation of superhero films was full of butts. Superheroes, but it's gritty, like Bourne. Superheroes, but it's shaky, like Bourne. Superheroes, but it's realistic. Superheroes, but we get into the politics. Superheroes, but it's prestige TV. But it's a post-western. But it's this. But it's that. There's no but in Blue Beetle. This is the most comfortable a mainstream superhero film has been with its basic nature since, I don't know, those Fantastic Four movies. That isn't to knock any of the above, by the way. I love a lot of those examples, and many did show the world that superhero media could be more than just superhero media. But I've got a lot of respect for the now rare straightforwardness and sincerity with which Blue Beetle embraces the metaphorical cape and tights. The spirit of this film feels nearer Raimi Spider-Man, even nearer Batman and Robin than MCU or DCEU, and I think that's the point. Midway through the film, we enter the hangout of Ted Kord, the previous Blue Beetle. It's located beneath a mansion, and it's full of pointedly retro gear. This is a classic superhero lair, emphasis on classic. This is Avengers Mansion, not Avengers Tower. It's not Snyder's crashed Kryptonian scout ship, it's the Donner Fortress of Solitude. This isn't a Nolan Batcave, this is a 90s Batcave. With the lair, the goofy tech, the legacy of Ted Kord coming into play, Blue Beetle makes the above explicit, brings the echoes of that pre-grit, stylized, larger-than-life conception of superhero cinema into the text. Blue Beetle, like most films, is about a great many things, but one of those things, one of the central ones, is legacy. It's about inheriting things, companies, mantles, love, but it's also about legacy and superhero stories more widely. You might think this is a given. It is, after all, about a legacy character. Jaime Reyes is not the first Blue Beetle. Like Miles in the Spider-Verse series, he's taking up an existing identity. But that comparison is a deceptive one. Into the Spider-Verse is able to work with the assumption the viewer knows is attached to Peter Parker. Blue Beetle can't do the same thing with Ted Kord, but it gets around this hurdle, uses the presence of this hurdle in, I think, a rather inventive way. Through the lair, the tech, the giant robotic contraption embedded with silly gadgets, Blue Beetle constructs Ted Kord as a stand-in for pre-Batman Begins, pre-MCU superhero media. Because the general audience doesn't know Kord, the film's able to use him like this, as a general symbol rather than a specific figure, and is then able to use that symbol. Because Kord's lair, his gadgets, his robots, aren't incidental here. This stuff isn't background set dressing, no, it's essential to the defeat of the new, corrupted Kord Industries, and to the rescue and victory of Jaime. Jenny and his family use all this to thwart Victoria's plans. All this stuff is a little silly, but so what? It isn't realistic, it isn't subtle, it isn't a measured embrace of this genre's more fantastic roots, it's a total one. And maybe watching these sequences, part of your brain is laughing, thinking, well now, that's just silly, but it doesn't really matter, because your face is smiling. Through moments like this, and in a more abstract way through the whole film's directness, the way it plays things straight, the drawn-out origin sequence, the way its characters smile and care, the way they don't filter reality through a layer of quips, and the way they fall for each other, remember? Blue Beetle writes a love letter to the way projects like this looked before the genre became so self-aware, so insecure. On one level then, Blue Beetle is a celebration of legacy, not Ted Kord's, but the legacy of superhero cinema's past, the sentimental highs and the rubber nipple lows of all those bold, adaptive stabs before figures like Nolan and Feige turned it into what it is now. But it doesn't stop there at admiration. Kord's stash isn't nostalgia fuel, it's essential and effective. The remembered past isn't called back to, it's brought forward and used. There's been so much progress since the days of Steel, of X-Men, of Ang Lee's Hulk, but maybe there's something we've lost along the way, Blue Beetle argues, and maybe it's something worth trying to revive. The openly, sincerely fantastic imagining that characterized the early days of comic book cinema, not to mention the early days of, comic books, is potent and beautiful in itself, not merely as a jumping off point, and not merely as the basis for a more modern, realistic, cinematic franchise. It's amusing, then, that Blue Beetle finds itself in the liminal, continuity-straddling position it does, but that is a position that suits the film just fine. Blue Beetle doesn't have to worry about universe building, about the franchise machinery that's been clunkily visible in so many recent DC and Marvel projects. That liminal position allows the film to exist in a little bubble of freedom, to stay firmly its own quirky thing. It's able to keep the scope small and human. It's able to tell an emotional story, a Latino story, a simple but true story, and do so with a sincerity, a directness bordering on heavy-handedness, because why not? It's true that the film isn't flawless, that some of these themes which are so directly brought up aren't always explored as far as they could have been, but the film bumps up against the grander systems of inequality the same way it does the more familiar money problems, family tensions, and romantic road bumps. That is, with optimism, with panache, and with a real degree of insight. And that shouldn't really be a surprise. Ted Kord's old secret lair calls back to that aforementioned 90s Batcave aesthetic, but that's not all. Indeed, Ted Kord isn't even the oldest Beetle mentioned. Dan Garrett, the Golden Age Beetle from the 1930s, gets a reference too. His is one of the Beetle suits on display, and those suits, well, their designs are nearer Batman and Robin than Batman and Robin. Blue Beetle's drawing on the past of superhero cinema, but that's not the only past it's looking to. Sure, it feels like Raimi Spider-Man, but maybe that's not just because it's channeling those films. Maybe both are aiming for the same target. Because there's also just a real comic bookiness here. A lot of the family stuff, the money worries, the optimism, the panache, the melodrama, the heart on the sleeve, the saying just what you think, feels ripped right from the pages of, say, an early Spider-Man comic. In the landscape of today's superhero media, moments like this might feel odd, corny, heavy-handed, but I'm willing to bet that if you think this directness, this naked enthusiasm, this painting with primary colors is out of place here, then you've probably watched more recent superhero films than you've read older comics. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but just remember, this may well be nearer what superhero media once was than any of the rest of them. Again, Blue Beetle is about a lot of things, and I'll talk a bit more about some of the rest of them in a companion video of sorts I'll be releasing on Patreon in the coming days, but at its heart is a sense of legacy, is gratitude for these types of stories, these types of films, and especially for the parts of them which lately have maybe unfairly kind of fallen away. Cheers for watching. Smash that like button or I'll send an alien exosuit to bond agonizingly with your spine, and indeed your very being. I'll see you all next time. Special thanks as always to all my Patreon supporters, especially Daniel Goldhorn, Karen Kuhlman, Magath, Ryan Emily, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. And also shout out to longtime subscriber Blue Beetle. I might have given this one a miss like I did The Flash if it weren't for his gentle nudging, and I'm glad I didn't. But yeah, peace.